I remember the first time I saw the lake. It was early morning, the kind of quiet that feels borrowed from a dream. Mist hovered over the water like it was undecided about leaving, and the sun was just beginning to spill gold across the surface. I stood there alone, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth, and I thought, this is it. This is where my family will make memories. Back then, Daniel was only 12. He still laughed easily, still ran toward me when I came home, still believed that his mother could do anything. And, in a way, I could. I was the breadwinner then. I worked long hours, harder than most people realized. I stayed late, skipped vacations, ignored the creeping ache in my back and the constant fatigue, because I had a vision. I wanted something permanent, something that said, we belong somewhere. We built something. That lake house wasn't just a property, it was my proof. I designed it myself. Every line, every window, every inch of that house came from my mind. I wanted big windows facing the water so the light would pour in during the mornings. I wanted a wide deck so Daniel could fish, laugh, grow. I picked warm wood tones, soft furniture, and shelves filled with books I hoped my family would one day read together. When it was finished, I cried. Not because it was perfect, but because it meant I had survived everything it took to get there. Years passed. Daniel grew up. He married Laura. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, the lake house stopped feeling like mine. At first, it was small things. Daniel and Laura would go up for the weekend without telling me. I'd arrive later to find empty bottles in the trash, furniture moved around, dishes stacked carelessly in the sink. Laura would wrinkle her nose and say things like, "We really should modernize this place. It feels dated." Dated? As if the years of effort, sacrifice, and love embedded in those walls were some kind of inconvenience. I swallowed my discomfort. I told myself this was normal, that parents step back, that children take over, that this is how life works. So I kept cooking, kept cleaning, kept paying. Whenever they came, I stocked the fridge, bought groceries they liked, cooked meals they barely noticed. I was still trying to earn my place in a house I owned. And then came that weekend. It was supposed to be peaceful. I had planned to spend the afternoon by the water, reading, maybe take a walk along the shore. I went grocery shopping early that morning. Daniel had texted me a list. Specialty cheeses, imported wine, things I never bought for myself. As I stood in the checkout line, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Mom, Laura's parents are visiting. We need the house to ourselves. Check into the motel. We'll reimburse you." I read it once, then again, and again. The noise of the store faded. The beeping scanners, the chatter, the carts rolling past, it all disappeared. It felt like lake water in a fresh cut, sharp, cold, immediate. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just typed, understood, and for the first time in years, I stopped pretending everything was fine. I walked out of the store without the groceries. Instead of driving toward the lake house, I turned the wheel in the opposite direction, toward my lawyer's office. The drive felt surreal, like I was watching someone else make decisions with my hands. My heart was pounding, but beneath the pain was something unexpected. Clarity. I sat in that familiar office, the leather chair creaking softly beneath me, and said the words out loud for the first time. I want to sell the lake house. My lawyer raised his eyebrows, surprised but not shocked. He knew the history. He'd seen the paperwork, the sole ownership, the years of maintenance bills with my name alone on them. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. By the end of the week, it was listed. By the end of the next week, a young couple made an offer, full price. They were expecting their first child. They talked about fishing mornings, quiet evenings, and building a life together. I smiled. They reminded me of who I used to be. The closing was fast, clean, legal, and then came the final visit. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't warn Laura. I arrived with the buyers on a... I didn't look back. That was the hardest part. Not turning around when I heard Daniel call my name, not slowing when Laura's sharp voice cut through the air, not letting the weight of years of guilt pull me backward like a tide. I walked down the gravel path toward my car, each step strangely steady, like my body had already made peace with what my heart was still learning. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. My hands trembled slightly, but there was no regret in them, only release. As I drove away, the lake slipped out of view behind the trees. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't leaving something behind for someone else to enjoy. I was leaving it behind for myself. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the main road. Daniel. Again. And again. I didn't answer. That night, I stayed in a quiet hotel, not the motel Daniel had suggested, but a place I chose myself. I ordered room service. I sat by the window. I let the silence settle around me like a blanket instead of a punishment. The next morning, the messages began in earnest. Confusion at first. "Mom, call me, please." Then anger. "How could you embarrass us like that?" Then desperation. "Laura's parents are furious. This was supposed to be a family weekend." A family weekend. I stared at the words, feeling something inside me finally harden into truth. When had I stopped being family? I waited 2 days before responding, not to punish him, but because I needed time to hear my own voice again. When I finally called Daniel, his tone was sharp, wounded, defensive all at once. "You blindsided us," he said. "Laura is devastated." I listened quietly. "I built that house," I replied when he paused. "I paid for it. I maintained it, and I was asked to leave it like an inconvenience." "That wasn't," he started. "It was exactly that," I said calmly. "You didn't ask, you told." Silence stretched between us. Then he said something that surprised me, not because it hurt, but because it revealed everything. "You could have just stayed somewhere else. It wasn't that big a deal." Not a big deal. That was the moment I understood. To him, my presence had become optional, my sacrifice invisible, my feelings negotiable. We ended the call politely, coldly, like distant acquaintances who once shared something meaningful but no longer remembered how. Laura didn't call at all. Instead, I heard from relatives, whispers at first, then outright accusations. "She overreacted. She's being dramatic. How selfish can you be to sell a family home?" I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I was tired of explaining my worth. Weeks passed. The money from the sale settled into my account heavier than I expected, not just financially, but symbolically. It wasn't wealth. It was validation, proof that what I had built mattered, even if my own family had forgotten. I downsized, bought a small place near the water, not a lake house, just a quiet apartment with a balcony facing a river. No guest rooms, no expectations, no one dropping by unannounced. I furnished it simply. Modern, they would have said, but really it was peaceful. For the first time, every object in my home was chosen for me. Mornings became slow. Coffee on the balcony, books I actually finished, walks without destination or obligation. And slowly, the guilt faded. Daniel visited once, months later. He looked older, tired, like someone who had lost something but wasn't sure what. "I didn't realize how much you did," he said awkwardly, standing in my doorway. I nodded. Not triumphantly, not bitterly. "I know," I replied. He didn't stay long. Laura never called. But I was okay with that, because something had shifted inside me. I no longer needed permission to exist comfortably in my own life. The lake house had been a dream. Time has a way of changing the shape of pain. At first, the days after Daniel's visit felt oddly hollow, not empty, just quiet in a way that made old thoughts echo louder. I would catch myself reaching for my phone to tell him something small, something meaningless, like a habit my hands hadn't yet unlearned. Then I'd stop, breathe, let the moment pass. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me the most. Anger would have been easier, cleaner, but what replaced it was something heavier and calmer: acceptance, the kind that settles deep like sediment at the bottom of a lake after the water finally stops churning. People assume that when you draw a boundary, you do it loudly, that there's yelling, tears, slammed doors. But the truth is, the most permanent boundaries are drawn in silence. Weeks turned into months. I filled my time carefully at first, like someone relearning how to walk. I joined a small book club by the river. Most of the members were strangers, people who knew nothing about my past sacrifices, my motherhood, my mistakes. They only knew me as me, and that felt strangely freeing. One afternoon, after a meeting, a woman named Helen asked what I used to do before retiring. "I worked," I said simply. She laughed. "Didn't we all?" But something in her tone invited honesty, and before I realized it, I found myself saying more. "I built a house once, for my family, and then I let it go." She didn't ask why. She just nodded, like she understood exactly what that meant. That was when I realized how rare true understanding is, and how little it depends on blood. Back home, I began sorting through old boxes I'd carried with me for years: photographs, drawings Daniel made as a child, cards with crooked handwriting that once said things like "best mom ever." I sat on the floor, surrounded by memories, and let myself grieve properly, not just the house, but the version of motherhood I thought would last forever. We don't talk enough about how mothers grieve living children, how you mourn not their absence, but their distance, their indifference, the way they slowly step out of the roles you once played so fully. One photo stopped me cold. Daniel at the lake, maybe 8 years old, holding a fishing rod twice his size, grinning like he'd discovered the secret of the universe. I remembered that day clearly, how proud he was, how he ran toward me, how he wanted me to see everything. I pressed the photo against my chest and whispered, "I did my best." And for the first time, I believed it. Around that time, Daniel called again. His voice was different, less defensive, less sharp. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" We talked for over an hour. He told me things I hadn't known, about pressure, about Laura's expectations, about how easy it was to slowly accept comfort without questioning who provided it. He didn't excuse himself, but he didn't fully take responsibility either. Not yet. And that was okay. Growth rarely happens all at once. He admitted at one point, "I thought you'd always be there, no matter what." I replied gently, "I was. That's the problem." There was a long pause. "I didn't realize that being there was costing you something." I didn't respond right away. "It cost me myself," I said finally, "and I won't pay that price again." He didn't argue. When the call ended, I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I had spoken my truth without shrinking it to keep someone else comfortable. Laura still kept her distance. I heard through relatives that she was angry, that she felt humiliated, that she believed I'd ruined her parents' impression of the family. Once, that would have crushed me. Now, it barely stirred anything at all. I understood something important by then. Anyone who benefits from your silence will be upset when you find your voice.
Spring came softly that year. The river outside my balcony swelled with melted snow, moving fast, alive, unapologetic. I spent hours watching it, thinking about how water never asks permission to move forward, it just does. I took a short trip alone, something I'd never done before. No itinerary, no one to check in with, just me, a small suitcase, and the quiet thrill of choosing entirely for myself. On the last evening of that trip, I sat near another body of water.
Change doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It slips in quietly, disguised as routine, hidden inside ordinary days. And if you're not paying attention, you miss the moment when life begins to tilt in a new direction. I noticed it first in the way Daniel started calling more often. Not frequently, not desperately, just steadily. Short conversations at first, updates about work, complaints about traffic, small, meaningless things that carried an unspoken message beneath them. I don't know how to talk to you anymore, but I don't want to stop. I listened more than I spoke. That was another lesson I had learned. Silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it's space, and space allows truth to surface when it's ready. One evening, months after the lake house sale, Daniel called later than usual. His voice was strained, like he'd been holding something in all day. "Mom," he said, "are you busy?" I wasn't. But more importantly, for the first time in years, I wasn't rearranging my life to be available either. We talked. At first, about nothing. Then about Laura. Not accusations, not anger, fatigue. He spoke about constant expectations, about hosting, about appearances, about how nothing ever felt finished or good enough, how every space had to impress someone, how even their home no longer felt like a place to rest. As he spoke, I saw it clearly, the same cycle repeating itself, only this time I wasn't inside it. "I think I took you for granted," he said suddenly. The words landed softly, not like an apology, more like a realization that had surprised even him. I didn't rush to comfort him. "I allowed it," I said honestly. "That part is mine." Another long silence. "I don't want to do that anymore," he said, "to you or to anyone." That was when I knew something real had shifted, because growth doesn't sound like guilt, it sounds like accountability. Laura, on the other hand, was unraveling in her own way. I heard it through fragments, relatives, mutual friends, conversations that reached me without invitation. She felt wronged, exposed, embarrassed. She spoke about the lake house as if it had been stolen from her, as if ownership were something absorbed simply by occupying space long enough. Once she sent me a message, not an apology, a justification. She wrote about how family shares, how I should have discussed it with them first, how public embarrassment was unnecessary. I read it once. Then I deleted it, not because it hurt, but because it no longer mattered. I had stopped negotiating my self-respect. That summer, I began volunteering at a local community center, not because I was lonely, but because I wanted to contribute without being consumed. I taught basic design skills to younger women starting over. Some were divorced, some widowed, some simply tired of disappearing inside other people's lives. They listened closely when I spoke, not because I was loud, but because I spoke from a place they recognized. One afternoon, a woman asked me, "How did you stop feeling guilty?" I thought about it carefully before answering. I realized guilt was the last tool people used when control stopped working. She nodded slowly, like something had just clicked. Daniel came to visit again in the fall. This time, he stayed longer. He helped cook. He cleaned without being asked. He noticed things, the river view, the way the light shifted in the evening, the quiet I had built around myself.
"It's peaceful here," he said. "Yes," I replied, "because it belongs to me." He didn't argue. Instead, he smiled sadly. "I don't think I ever saw you as a person before," he admitted. "Just my mom." It wasn't cruel, it was honest, and honesty, even when late, is still valuable. Before he left, he hesitated at the door. "I don't know what will happen with Laura, but I know I don't want to repeat the same mistakes." I placed my hand on his arm. "That's all any parent can hope for," I said, "that their children learn, eventually." After he left, I sat alone for a long time.
There's a moment in every long journey where you stop measuring distance by miles and start measuring it by who you are now compared to who you were before. I reached that moment quietly, without ceremony. It happened on an ordinary morning. I was standing on my balcony, holding a warm cup of coffee, watching the river move with its usual patience. No rush, no hesitation, just steady motion forward. And suddenly, it occurred to me that I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology, not approval, not permission. I had already arrived. Daniel called less frequently after that, not because we were drifting apart, but because our relationship had finally found a natural rhythm, one built on choice, not obligation, respect, not entitlement. When he did call, there was something new in his voice, awareness. He spoke more carefully, listened more fully, and when he asked questions, he actually waited for the answers. One evening, months later, he asked something that told me just how far he'd come. "Mom," he said, "were you ever lonely back then?" I thought about the question for a long time. "Yes," I answered honestly, but I didn't know it. I was too busy being needed. He was quiet after that. "I don't want that kind of life," he said. "Then don't build it," I replied. "Need feels like love at first, but it isn't the same thing." Around that time, the inevitable happened. Laura confronted me, not in person. She asked Daniel to arrange a meeting. I agreed, not because I owed her anything, but because I no longer feared uncomfortable conversations. We met at a small cafe near the river, neutral ground, public, calm. She arrived tense, polished, defensive before a single word was spoken. "I just want closure," she said. I nodded. "So do I." She spoke first about embarrassment, about feeling blindsided, about how the lake house had represented a future she thought was secure. I listened. When she finished, I spoke gently. "You were never entitled to my sacrifices," I said, "and I was wrong to offer them without boundaries." She bristled. "You could have talked to us," she said. "I did, for years. You just didn't hear me because my discomfort was convenient." That was when the truth finally surfaced. She wasn't angry because I sold the house. She was angry because I stopped being useful. The realization drained the fight from her face. We didn't part as friends, but we parted clearly, and clarity is its own kind of peace. After that meeting, something unexpected happened. I felt free of the story. Not numb, not detached, just finished. The lake house no longer haunted my thoughts. It no longer symbolized loss or victory. It had simply become a chapter, important, formative, but complete. I spent more time doing things that had nothing to do with being a mother. I painted again, something I'd abandoned decades earlier. I wasn't good at it. That didn't matter. It belonged only to me. I traveled lightly, short trips, long walks, conversations with strangers who knew nothing about my past and expected nothing of my future. And in those moments, I learned something powerful. A woman's life does not end when she stops sacrificing, it begins. Daniel's marriage eventually changed, not dramatically, not explosively, but inevitably. When patterns go unexamined, they repeat. When they're questioned, they either evolve or fall apart. I didn't interfere. That was another boundary. I loved him without rescuing him. Months later, he told me quietly, "I finally understand why you sold the house." I smiled. "Good," I said. "That means it worked." On the anniversary of the sale, I returned to the lake alone, not to the house, but to the shore. I sat on a bench and watched the water shimmer just as it had that final day. There was no bitterness in me, only gratitude for the strength I didn't know I had, for the lesson that arrived disguised as betrayal, for the peace that followed courage. I realized then that the lake had always promised something, not family unity, not tradition, but reflection. And when I finally looked clearly at myself, I chose differently. I chose dignity over devotion that erased me. I chose boundaries over silence. I chose myself. And that choice, that single quiet choice, changed everything. Years later, people would sometimes ask me if I ever regretted selling the lake house. They expected a complicated answer, a sigh, a pause filled with nostalgia. But the truth was simple. No, because regret only lives where choice was taken from you, and that choice, walking away, had been mine. The young couple who bought the house sent me a card once, just a photograph really, their child standing at the edge of the dock, holding a fishing rod far too big for his hands, smiling like the world was kind. I framed it, not because I missed the house, but because it reminded me that good things don't end, they just change owners. Daniel grew into himself, slowly, like someone learning to stand in his own weight.